Before I talk about my inpatient experience, I think it might be helpful to just give you a few words of background about myself. I did ask Louise, thank you for handing out these flyers, but I think if I can just emphasize a few points. It was just over, or just under 4 years ago, so 2008, I had a brain hemorrhage which paralyzed the whole right side of my body and left me unable to walk. And as you can see, I've been blessed with a remarkable recovery. And the other blessing which I'm really thankful for is that for many years I trained in a discipline called neuro-linguistic programming. I don't know how many of you, yes, lots of smiles, that always makes me feel good. And what that enabled me to do was two things. One is firstly to deal with the fact that I'd lost half the movement in my body, and secondly to support and drive my recovery process. And in hospital what I did was I kept an extensive diary and journal, and I noted down all the good things that happened and all the difficulties I had. So I was very aware of what worked and what didn't. And after some time, when I came out of hospital, I presented to the medical team, and I noted that there were 7 distinct steps that I took as part of my recovery, and those are the ones that you can see on the leaflet. And what I've been doing since then is training and coaching health professionals in the National Health Service. Firstly, to get a better idea of what great recovery looks like through a patient's eyes, and secondly, what they need to do differently in order to help improve the recovery process overall. So in terms of my brief talk, and I can talk for England on this, I'm aware that are there any of you have to rush off for trains, just so I can be aware of? Yeah, okay, so I promise I will keep this brief. One of the things that I noticed is that I've lost my train of thought now. Where was I? So my 7 steps. Yes, that's right. So in terms of what works and what doesn't work, that I applied the same stance of curiosity in terms of each and every health professional who interacted with me. So I was very curious as to the dynamic, the communication dynamic between people who looked after me. So for the purpose of this brief talk, I'm going to highlight some of the great things that happened to me. And I should add, I think in contrast to some of the things I read in Louise's extract, this is actually a lovely tale. So I was blessed by being under a consultant, a very visionary man called Dr. David Collis, who ran a wonderful team. And I truly thank him, and he's really put me on the path to giving back the gift of recovery and also providing insights for health professionals. So where did my inpatient experience begin? Well, in the accident and emergency department. So I had the stroke, which was a brain hemorrhage, and when I was admitted, in their eagerness to reassure me that I would be okay, they started to talk about the stroke being a clot rather than a bleed. So they were then talking about the thrombolysis procedure, and already what I was doing in my head was creating a picture of rapid recovery. So the idea that they would do the thrombolysis and the movement would come back within several hours. Well, sadly my hopes were dashed, because they scanned me and then discovered that it was a bleed. And with that, then as I asked questions as then what, how long, the answers were very vague. And this caused a huge, enormous cloud of uncertainty fall upon myself and my wife. And I was then admitted into the acute stroke unit. And this was further reinforced, and my anxiety was further reinforced by a doctor coming in through the curtains, examining me quickly, and then mumbling something about, well, you may have to go for surgery. And he was like, yes, but where? And so they told me where. And what she was doing was, she was almost thinking out loud as she was going through what she had to do. So in hindsight, what would have been better was for her not to have that conversation in front of me. To decide what she was going to say, but also, even if she didn't know what the answer to the question was about, this whole thing about framing. I think for me the big thing, the huge thing, is about framing. That I think was everything in terms of how I was dealt with. And to give you an amazing sort of sense of contrast to this is that, oh, by the way, I was admitted on the Friday. You know what happens in hospitals over the weekend. Yeah, it's like, it just goes to sleep, doesn't it? It's like a sort of, all the energy is sort of sucked out, and it's like, oh dear. And so of course Monday the whole place comes alive, doesn't it? And nurses running around, doctors here, and phones ringing. It's like, wow, this is interesting. It's like I'm in a film, you know. And the consultant, two consultants, one was stroke and the other was cardiologist. So this chap called Will Wallace came in, who was my consultant cardiologist, and he walked in. He stood at the end of the bed, and he was one of these people that he stood there, and I knew that he knew what he just glowed expertise. And he didn't say very much, but then he looked at me and he just said these very few words. He said, David, he said, you're a young, fit man. He said, there's a good chance of recovery. Just disconnect yourself for 3 months from the world, and if you get better earlier, then it will be a bonus. And I thought, great, I now have a frame in terms of my recovery. I have a sense of where I'm going. I have a sense of direction. So then I was visited by my wonderful physiotherapist, Jeanette Gibson, and I had two. Another lady was called Kathy Jessamy, and they were. And if I have time, I'll read you this extra. I referred to them as magicians because they had this wonderful sense of. Not only were they lovely people, but I had this sense of. This really deep sense of intuition as to what they were doing. And what that did was it gave me a huge amount of confidence. And of course by this time I'm bursting, aren't I, in terms of how long, when, what, just kind of calm down. So she looked at me and she said, look David, the first 2 weeks are really critical. A lot of movement can come back. But, and here was the beautiful use of but, she said, weeks, months, in some cases years, you can retrain your affected side to regain movement. And what that did was it gave me a huge sense of hope, because at that point my brain said, I don't care how long this takes. If it takes 5 years, then I'm going to learn to walk again. I'm going to do it. And she then, again, to just give you an idea of how skilled she was, she said, I want you to take your affected hand. So I took my affected hand. And she said, I want you to visualize it opening. And I want you to do it by opening and closing your left hand. So I did that. And she could see this kind of quizzical look on my face. And she said to me, she said, you won't notice anything yet, which is a beautiful frame, the presupposition being that something would happen at some stage. But, and again, lovely use of but there is a lot going on in your head, in your brain, as it attempts to reroute the neural pathways. And so I kept doing that. I kept doing that, and little by little my fingers began to flicker, and after 2 weeks I was able to fully open my hand. And for me that was truly a miracle. And although I still had a paralysed arm, I was so excited by the fact that I used to bring my hand and sort of shake someone's hand like that, because it was just a sort of great sense of achievement that I got this movement. And I guess if you imagine what it's like, there's sort of very basic things like peeling a banana and putting the tooth cap back on the toothpaste and things. Just can't do it, can you? So that gives you contrast to framing. What I thought might be helpful is just quickly run through some of the examples of, you talked about extra mile, didn't you? How people went an extra mile. So over the weekend, that sort of sleepy weekend, I had a terrible night on the Friday night, and I was awakened by this young, upbeat male nurse called Andy. And he looked at me and he said, it's almost like he read my mind, because he said, I know you haven't been assessed by the physios yet, but he said, I think we can work together to get you to the bathroom and the toilet. And I know, having read your extract, to be able to go to the toilet in the toilet and to be showered was a major milestone. I mean, it was just... And I remember getting back and sitting in the chair by the side of my bed thinking, okay, if I can do this every day, I can get through this. And he helped me, and he made me feel better. And then there was John, because I was in this no man's land before Jeanette and Well. I had no idea of time frame. And so John was the chap who showered me on the Sunday, and I said, oh, they said that I was going to be discharged in the middle of next week. And he looked at me and he said, I don't think so, he said, look, there's some work needed here, and we are a fantastic unit, and we're going to support you and we're going to help you get better, but it's not going to be the middle of next week. So he kind of helped me with that vagueness, that sort of cloud of uncertainty. And what was really interesting, and we were talking about this earlier, is that there was almost like this spirit of vocation, this spirit of care, this great kind of compassion that seemed to run through the people that looked after me. And there was this chap called Pavlo, and he travelled for an hour and a half each way. Again, we were talking about this earlier. So if you work that out, that's what, 3 hours travelling each day, plus his 12-hour shift, that's 15 hours. That's a lot of hours, isn't it, before he's even had any time for himself. And he always had this lovely smile on his face, and nothing was too much of a problem. And one of the things I did have was this high level of urgency, because I couldn't get myself to the toilet. I always wanted to be going to the toilet, so it probably went far more than I needed to. But he was so gracious and so patient in getting me into the wheelchair, out of the wheelchair, onto the toilet, off the toilet. And it must have been a real pain. But he never showed, he never reflected in any way, despite the hours that he was working.